Hi again, everybody. Tim Muldoon back for the lucky 13th installment of Ignatian Mindfulness. And this one is going to focus on our relationships. And well, it should be obvious. We all need them, and certainly they help us to thrive. But I want to start by sharing the results of a pretty well-known study that was undertaken by Harvard University over a period of 75 years. So they started studying what made men thrive in their lives and what led to their happiness. And yes, it was a sample of men, Harvard men, back in the early part of the 20th century. And they surveyed these same men over the decades and asked them very personal questions about what gave their lives meaning, what helped them to survive physically, mentally, intellectually. And over this period of time, remarkable study, there was really one key finding, and there's a very good TED Talk that I would encourage you to look at. You can probably just Google TED Talk, Harvard Study, Happiness. And the current director boils it down to one thing: relationships. Relationships help people to thrive. It leads to their physical well-being. It leads to their emotional well-being. And that to me is an incredibly important point to recall during these topsy-turvy days that we are living through, that ultimately it is our relationships that will sustain us. Now, for some, that may be kind of a daunting thing. You know, we may have injuries in our relationships. We may have broken relationships. We may not have particularly strong relationships. But here I would encourage us to return to the insight that I shared early on in one of these reflections, namely that we can fill our lives with what I described as the honey of those influences which really just lead us to a better disposition. So, you know, maybe one way to come at this practically is to ask, what might be one thing that I could do today to nurture a relationship, maybe an existing relationship, or maybe a new relationship? But what can I do to nurture it? So, you know, obviously in these days, our minds are everywhere. And even in ordinary life, it's very easy to get stuck in the day-to-day just business of, you know, our work or whatever it is that we have to do. But this might be the time to really be especially mindful of the ways that we cultivate our relationships, particularly with those that are dear to us. And I might add, by the way, that many of us are in the period of having to kind of rethink how we relate to the people around us, even coworkers. How do we translate from this, you know, normal work environment to this virtual work environment, for example? Or if I'm a teacher, how do I reach out to students? And if I'm a parent, how do I reach out to my kids? How do I reach out to my spouse? So these are important questions, and I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I do want to draw from this, I think, important insight that this Harvard study gives us, that over the course of a long life, a life well lived is one in which we prioritize our relationships. Just a closing kind of spiritual note, closing theological note, that relationships are the way to, I think, that ultimately we come to discern the presence of God most pronounced in our lives. So for those of us that come at this from the faith angle, one way to really be, I think, contemplating this question is that if God comes to us through the presence of those that we love, what is our task in nurturing those relationships towards not only our own good, but the good of those people that we do love? So a closing thought for this 13th day of Ignatian Mindfulness. Again, thanks for listening. I will see you again next time.